they've both had two very good years, and this is obviously a down year. So, we got some work to do on that. But again, it's a lot goes into a good year, and a lot goes into a bad year. So, we're not going to make any rash decisions. But Pete McCarthy's been a stalwart of the Adirondack Thunder as a player, as a coach. So, it's just definitely not all on Pete McCarthy. It's definitely not all on Mike Bergen. So, it's all in the Adirondack Thunder organization. So, never a quick decision, but again, Pete McCarthy's done a lot of good things for the Adirondack Thunder.
You have to look at no matter mid-season wise, whoever Pete's brought in, they've always seemed to contribute. I guess that's got to play a factor in that decision as well.
Yeah, it's tough in the ECHL. No doubt about it. Obviously, last year, Pete brought some players in. The year before, Pete brought a lot of good players in that helped us make the playoff run in year one. A lot of injuries, happen every year. We're not making excuses here. It happens to every team in the ECHL. Losing Ryan Smith this year around the holidays, it's a crushing loss. Ryan played about 25 minutes a game, arguably the best penalty killer in the ECHL. He scores about 25 goals a year, but losing him unexpectedly, I think at that point, if you look at our win-loss record, it's probably the worst in the ECHL. I don't have the stats in front of me, but losing him, it really hurts. Losing Jace Isley, to no fault of her own, Utica made a decision. Jace doesn't score a ton of goals, but he plays the right way. That's it's a big loss. So we can look back as to why, but we just didn't get it done. And obviously brought a lot of kids in late in the year, which hopefully will help us on the ice next year. That's part of the ECHL, right? To keep trying to reload. But so hopefully that bodes well for us next year. But this year, we just didn't have the right mix of players to put a good product on the ice.
What does that say about both Bergen and Pete that they're able to scout these college kids and bring them in, and they do make an impact immediately?
Yeah, well, obviously, they understand the ECHL. It helps that they both played in the league and they're still connected to the ECHL. So we knew that coming in it would be a little bit of a learning process for Pete and Mike just hopping off the ice into the coaching role. I think they've really learned the ECHL over the last couple of years. So and they know, the roster is going to keep churning over and over again. That's kind of what we like about Pete and Mike. There's a couple of positives about those two. So, they never, kind of rest as to what their roster is. And that's a continual process, going forward for our coaching staff.
You talked about losses, but you look at two key losses really early in the season. The loss of Paulino, who's kind of expected to bring in that loss from Ashbrook, and Ryan Francis, a guy who's expected to produce, a guy like Smith at 25 goals a year.
Yeah, Francis obviously stepped away out of training camp, and we lost him for half the year. He was expected to be, a top-line guy and score the 25, 30 goals a year, and it just didn't work out for him, unfortunately. When he came back, he kind of had a spark, but then it kind of flatlined, and, at the deadline, Pete moved him for a couple of future pieces that we hope to have next year, and hopefully those two players will be able to score goals for us. Paulino, he had some pretty good stats over his career in Cincinnati, but it just didn't work here, unfortunately. And obviously he got traded to Allen for a future piece that we expect to be able to contribute next year. It just didn't work. Sometimes it does. Sometimes, it's just a combination of the right team, at the right time, and it just didn't work. I don't think he had too many goals in Allen either. So losing Ashbrook, there's a reason Ashbrook didn't return. I'm not going to get into the details. He had a decent year in Cincinnati, but I think he was up in the AHL, like 4 or 5 different teams. So, but yeah, Ashbrook had a tremendous year here, and like I mentioned earlier, we just were not able to replace a couple players that we lost last year. Ashbrook, losing Grasso was a huge loss. We knew Shane Harper wasn't coming back. We knew Harano was not coming back to the ECHL. Just a few big losses, but no, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Ryan Smith was a big loss that was not expected.
Off the ice with you guys in the Adirondack Thunder organization, you got to be happy with the way that these fans show out for your specialty nights, the Stick It to Cancer night, just the organization as a whole. You have to be happy with the way that they have performed this year and what they did to keep this community coming back to this event.
Yeah, I'm always amazed, and maybe I shouldn't be anymore, but the Stick It to Cancer, it's amazing every year. I think over $36,000 this year. But it's the law enforcement night, it's the military night, it's just, it's the community events, our fan base, it's amazing. Obviously our 10-year anniversary from where we started in In 2015, I think we averaged about 2,500 fans a year. To 2025, over 4,500 fans a year. I'm not even sure if we sold out a game in 2015 to 16 now. It's amazing how far we've come, and again, I say it a lot. It's amazing our community, how much loyalty and support they give the Adirondack Thunder and our fan base. It's incredible. I say it all the time. The smallest community in the ECHL, but our fan bases, they're amazing. So they're very passionate. When we're not playing well, they do let us know, and we really do have a smart fan base and a very loyal and dedicated fan base. So we're very thankful, and we're very lucky.
Are there any, off-ice improvements or anything you're looking forward to heading into next season?
In the building?
In the building, promotion nights, kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, we always kick around promotion nights. Obviously, the season ended less than 24 hours ago, so we're going to give the front office staff a few days to kind of kick back and relax. So give us a little bit of time on promotional nights. Off ice, inside the building. Last summer we put a lot of money into infrastructure improvements. The building is 45 years old now. We've done a lot of fan-facing improvements over the last 10 years. So we really need to focus on internal infrastructure improvements again this summer. Our engine room, it's old, it hasn't been improved in over 20 years. We've put over $500,000 into it, which the fan base won't notice. But if we don't continue in that, it's harder and harder and more expensive to make ice every year. So we're really trying to focus on that over the next couple of years. We're looking to put in a bunch of new stalls in the Thunder locker room again. Again, we put in a few $100,000 into the Thunder areas in the last number of years. So we're going to continue to focus on items like that over the next couple of years. So that'll be the focus over this offseason, the next couple off seasons, to really put in money into the infrastructure of the Cool and String Arena.
How have the suites worked out for you since those have gone in?
Yeah, better than anybody could have imagined. Certainly better than I could have imagined. The fans love it. I think the 5 companies that have been suite holders for the first 3 years have all committed to coming back next year. They've been so good that we're actually starting to look to put in a couple more suites. So again, that's a large investment, but wildly successful. And again, very thankful to the companies that have supported the suites. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate it.